The sun was setting over Rain Cove Lake, and I was on the dock hammering away to fix a board that had split. It was peaceful until a car tore up the gravel driveway, tires grinding like they owned the place. Karen Lucas stepped out, clipboard in hand, wearing a smile that didn't belong. "I'm Karen Lucas, president of the HOA. You need to sell your property back for $25, she said, handing me a letter like it was a gift. I stared at the paper, then back at her. $25 for my $4, 5 million home. That's when I realized she wasn't bluffing. But I sure as hell was. For most people, a house is just a place to sleep, but for me and Jean, it was everything. It was the culmination of our hard work and our dreams. 10 years ago, we bought an old shack on Rain Cove Lake for just $25. The place was falling apart, leaky roof, crumbling walls, weeds everywhere, but to us it was perfect. We didn't expect much at first. The idea was simple, fix it up enough for weekend getaways. But as the years passed, the project grew. I spent every spare moment fixing things, replacing beams, patching up the roof, running new wiring. Jean handled the paperwork, managing the finances, and making sure the bills got paid. It wasn't easy, but we did it together. That old shack, once a decaying eyesore, was transformed. It became a $4.5 million home, a sprawling cedar house that hugged the shoreline. We never intended to sell. It was our sanctuary, a place where we could finally breathe. But Karen Lucas, president of the Rain Cove HOA, didn't see it that way. She saw our home as a threat. We didn't fit her idea of what the neighborhood should look like, and that was a problem. From the moment we started the renovations, we noticed her eyes on us. She didn't say anything at first, but we could feel the judgment. We didn't fit into her little world of perfect lawns and identical houses. I should have known something was coming when she showed up one afternoon. It was just another quiet day on the lake, me working on the dock, fixing a board that had splintered. I was focused, enjoying the peace and quiet, when I heard the sound of tires crunching on gravel. It wasn't the casual sound of someone driving by, it was aggressive, like someone who thought the road should be honored by their car. I stood up, wiping the sweat from my brow, and there she was, Karen Lucas, clipboard in hand, wearing that same smug smile. "Lane Dunford," she called out, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. It wasn't a question, just an accusation. "That's me," I said, already, feeling the irritation rise. Jean appeared on the porch behind me, eyes scanning the situation. She didn't waste time. In seconds, she'd read Karen's posture, her whole energy. I knew she was already thinking 3 steps ahead. Karen didn't even try to be polite. "I'm Karen Lucas, president of the Rain Cove HOA. You need to sell your property back for $25, she said, handing me a letter, like it was the best offer I'd ever receive. I glanced at the paper. $25. For my $4.5 million home, Karen just smiled, unfazed. "Yes, for the original purchase price plus a small consideration for improvements. You have 72 hours to sign the attached agreement and vacate the premises. If not, further action will be taken." I couldn't believe it. "You want me to sell my home, everything we've worked for $25? She didn't even flinch. "That's correct," she said, like it was the most normal thing in the world. I looked over at Jean. Her face was neutral, but I could see the storm brewing in her eyes. This wasn't just a silly demand. This was something more. When Karen turned to leave, Jean stepped forward with a grin that was as cold as the lake in winter. "Karen, does your buyback program come with a unicorn, or is that sold separately?" Karen froze for just a second, thrown off guard, but then walked away without another word. The second she was out of earshot, Jean turned to me. "We're not selling Lane. This is a power grab, and we're not going to let her take what's ours." I nodded. "We fight this. No one takes our home from us." The next few days felt like the calm before a storm. Jean and I didn't say much about the letter Karen had handed me. We didn't need to. The whole thing was absurd, but as the hours ticked by, it became clear that the battle had only just begun. Jean spent her time researching the HOA's rules, digging into every little clause and bylaw, while I started gathering evidence documenting every fine and violation they had already thrown our way. I knew how this worked. If you're going to take on a bully, you don't just stand there, no, you build a case. A mountain of paper that can't be ignored. Then the fines started rolling in. First, they hit us with a fine for an unauthorized aquatic vessel color. Apparently, our old blue kayak was too vibrant for their standards. Not long after, we got a notice for non-conforming grass height, as if our lawn was some sort of rebellious teenager. Then came the subversive mailbox fine because we dared to have one shaped like a lighthouse. Each notice was more ridiculous than the last, but the pattern was clear. Karen wasn't playing around. This was her method. If she couldn't bully us into submission with her fake buyback, she'd just drown us in paperwork and petty fines until we gave in. Jean didn't back down, though. Each fine went into what she called the Book of Stupid. It became a running joke, but I could see the fire in her eyes. She wasn't just taking notes, she was preparing for war. The fines kept coming, each one more absurd than the last. Joyful Lawn, $100. Unsanctioned dock, which was, in fact, the same dock I'd built with my own two hands, $200. The penalties piled up, and I started to see exactly what Karen was doing. She was trying to make us break, to force us into a position where we'd sell just to stop the madness. I tried to keep my cool. I really did. But with every ridiculous fine, my patience started wearing thin. Jean was staying calm, even coldly efficient in the way she handled each fine, each letter. But inside, I could feel the tension building like a pressure cooker ready to blow. We both knew the worst was yet to come. And then it did. 2 weeks later, the big move came. It was just after dinner when the phone rang. I was in the workshop tinkering with a neighbor's old radio when I heard Jean's voice from the other room. It was tight, controlled. "Lane, it's the bank." I froze. We had a small renovation loan from Lakeside Community Bank. Nothing major, but it had always been a backup for our project. I walked into the living room and saw Jean's face pale and tense. "Mark from the bank just called," she said, handing me the phone. "It's bad, Lane." I took the phone, trying to keep my voice steady. "Lane Dunford," I said. "Mr. Dunford." Mark's voice crackled, filled with professional anxiety. "I'm calling about your home renovation line of credit. We've received a notice of a lien placed against your property. A very substantial one." My heart dropped. A lien. For what I gripped, the phone tighter. "How substantial?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. There was a rustle of papers on the other end. "It's from the Rain Cove HOA. It's for $53,000. I couldn't speak. My brain couldn't process it. $53,000, I repeated, my voice shaking. "Yes, sir. They've filed a lien against your property for the fines they've issued. The amount includes the fines for the dock, the kayak, the grass, and several others we have yet to confirm. And, well, I'm sorry to say this, but this lien puts you in technical default on your loan agreement." The world seemed to stop. $53,000. It wasn't just a fine, it was a weapon. A weapon that Karen had used to threaten everything we'd built. I was on autopilot now, fighting back the fury that threatened to consume me. "How long do we have?" I asked. 30 days, Mark said. "If the lien isn't cleared up in 30 days, the bank will be forced to call the loan due. We'll have to start foreclosure proceedings." Foreclosure. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. All our hard work, everything we'd put into this house, could be ripped away in 30 days if we didn't fix this. I hung up the phone and just stood there. My mind raced. Karen thought she had us, thought she'd finally found a way to break us. But she didn't know who she was messing with. Jean walked over, her face calm, but I could see the resolve in her eyes. "We need a plan," she said quietly, her voice steady. I looked at her, knowing that this wasn't just about fighting to keep our house anymore. This was war. And Karen was about to learn a hard lesson: you don't mess with people who have nothing left to lose. Jean and I knew we needed more than just words. We needed evidence. The lien, the fines, the threats, they were just paper. We needed to show the world that Karen wasn't just a bully, she was a criminal. Jean dove straight into the county records, pulling up old maps and deeds. Hours later, she called me over. "Lane, I found something." It was an old survey map, marking a property boundary near the lake. My heart skipped a beat. I remembered what Mr. Henderson had told us years ago. "There's an old iron pin by that oak tree. That's your true property line." Without hesitation, we grabbed shovels and headed outside. The day was cold, the wind biting, but there was no turning back. We started digging near the old oak, the place Mr. Henderson had mentioned. Minutes passed, then hours. But finally, my shovel hit something solid metal. I cleared away the dirt, and there it was, a survey pin, old, but clearly stamped with the year 1895. John's eyes lit up. "This is it," she whispered, holding up the pin. "This proves we've got rights to this property that supersede anything the HOA says." We didn't waste time. We grabbed the deed, the map, and made our way to the county records office. After hours of searching, we found it an original deed from 1895. It confirmed what we'd hoped. The property rights included water access, docking, and mooring rights that the HOA had no claim over. Armed with this legal weapon, we started setting up cameras. This wasn't just about defending our home, it was about catching Karen in the act. Jean got our high-tech drone ready, while I hid small wireless cameras around the property, making sure we'd capture every moment of any shady activity. The first night, nothing. The second night, still nothing. I was beginning to wonder if we'd wasted our time, but Jean didn't give up. She kept her eyes on the camera feeds, waiting for the storm to hit. Then on the fourth night, it happened. I was dozing off in the living room when Jean nudged me. "Lane, they're here." I jumped to my feet and grabbed the monitor. A truck was creeping down our private lane, headlights off. It wasn't just any truck, it was a work vehicle towing a small boat with a winch and crane attached. My blood ran cold. Those are the same guys, Jean said already, taking control of the drone. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the urgency. The drone's camera switched to thermal imaging, and we could see them clearly as they tried to maneuver the boat into position. They were attempting to pull our dock away. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. I have them on video. 2 men are attempting to steal my dock. I'm sending the footage now. As I spoke, Jean brought the drone low, hovering just feet above the thieves. They froze, eyes wide, their faces illuminated by the drone's bright lights. Seconds later, the sound of sirens cut through the air. The deputies arrived, flashlights flashing across the yard. The 2 men knew they were caught. They immediately put their hands up, surrendering without a fight. I felt a small sense of relief, but it wasn't over yet. We had the evidence, but now we needed to bring the whole truth to light. Jean and I shared a look. This was just the beginning. The sheriff's deputy took our statements, and as he walked back to his car, he gave us a smile. "You might want to get a camera system," he said, impressed by our setup. Jean's smile was cool and knowing. We already have one. With the video footage in hand, we knew we could finally expose Karen for who she truly was. The pieces of her scheme were starting to unravel, but we had to hit her where it hurt most, her pride. The HOA would be forced to answer for its actions, and we weren't about to let Karen win. The moment the sheriff's deputies hauled those 2 goons off, the weight that had been pressing down on us for weeks lifted just a little, but we knew the battle wasn't over yet. It wasn't just about catching the thieves. It was about exposing Karen and the HOA for what they truly were. And to do that, we needed to bring everything into the open. The first step was to send a letter to the HOA board. We weren't just going to sit back and let Karen slide out of this. We had the evidence, the 1,895 deed, the video footage, the forged signatures, and the threats of vandalism. We sent it all to them, demanding an emergency meeting. We made it clear that we weren't just going to let this slide. By the time the meeting was scheduled, the whole community was buzzing. Neighbors who had been too scared to speak out before were starting to ask questions. They saw the footage. They knew about the lies, the forgeries, the threats. People were beginning to realize that Karen's reign of terror had to end. The night of the meeting, the community clubhouse was packed. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Everyone from Rain Cove was there, including the Hendersons, the Millers, and a few other neighbors who had quietly supported us. Karen and the other board members sat at the front, their smug expressions failing to hide their unease. Karen started the meeting with her usual air of condescension. "We are here tonight because of some rather dramatic and, frankly, unsubstantiated allegations made by Mr. and Mrs. Dunford." She began clicking to a slide showing a Zillow page with our property values circled in red. She had probably thought this would be an easy win, a way to shut us up and make the problem go away. But she didn't realize what she was about to face. I stood up, walked to the laptop, and pressed play. The room went quiet as the video started. We showed everything: the 2 men sneaking onto our property, the thermal imaging from the drone, and most damning of all, the moment they realized they were being watched and surrendered to the deputies. The footage was clear as day, and Karen couldn't hide from it. When the video ended, there was a long silence. Karen's face had gone pale, but she quickly recovered, trying to brush it off. "A disturbing video, to be sure," she said, her voice smooth, "and I'm sure we're all grateful the sheriff's department handled it. However, this proves nothing other than the fact that our community was targeted by criminals. It has no bearing on the HOA." That's when Jean stood up. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her words were quiet, but they carried. "It has every bearing on the HOA, Karen. Because the lien you filed against our property, the one supposedly for unpaid fines, was dated 3 days before these men showed up to repossess our dock. You see, Karen, that's a very convenient coincidence, don't you think?" The room erupted. People started shouting, their voices filled with disbelief and anger. One man stood up, pointing at the projector. "That's my signature. I never signed that." Another woman shouted, "I voted no on that issue. This is fraud." Karen's composure cracked. She stood up, her hands shaking, her face flushed with rage. "This is slander. These are lies." But it was too late. The damage was done. We had caught her in the act. Jean wasn't done yet. She pushed forward, her voice steady but strong. "This wasn't just about fines or violations. We've dug deeper, Karen. We know what you've been planning. That's Mr. Sterling sitting at the back there. The developer you've been in bed with, trying to push through your personal agenda." All eyes turned to Mr. Sterling, who looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. We'd found the smoking gun. The public records showed that Sterling had been trying to acquire 5 contiguous shoreline properties for his luxury condo project. He had 4 of them, and the 5th one ours. Jean laid it all out. "You were trying to force us out so you could sell our property to him. That's why you forged the votes, created the false fines, and sent your goons to steal our dock. All of it, every single thing you've done, was for one reason: profit. The room was in chaos now. People were furious. Some of them turned on Karen, others on Sterling. It was clear that the truth had finally come out. Karen stood there, defeated, her face pale. She had underestimated us, thinking we were just a couple of old folks she could push around. She didn't know we had the truth on our side, and that was something she could never fight. But the real blow came when the judge ruled. It wasn't just about the fines or the fraud. The 1,895 deed, the forged votes, and the criminal acts all led to one thing: Karen's power was over. She was personally fined $10,000 for filing fraudulent documents, and the HOA was hit with a $50,000 fine for its gross mismanagement. The entire board was removed from office, and a third-party receiver was appointed to run the HOA until fair elections could be held. As we walked out of the courthouse, I couldn't help but feel a sense of quiet triumph. Karen's reign of terror had come to an end. She was left standing in the ruins of her empire, and we were walking away victorious. Jean squeezed my hand. "It's over," she whispered, a smile tugging at the corner of her lips. We'd fought for our home, for what was rightfully ours, and we had won.